This lecture is entitled The Vegetable in the Witness Box, presented in November of 2015. This consideration addresses the instantly available agricultural testimony surrounding us in the context of whether or not the variety, beauty, and utilitarian nature of vegetation confirms or contradicts the theory of evolution. A fair amount of the reasoning is drawn from a book by Islip Collier, a book by the same name, first published in 1922. This public lecture is being presented by Brother Jim Dillingham of the Cranston, Rhode Island Ecclesia. So, the question we're addressing is basically, how did we get here? We'll only be considering two options. One is the possibility that the theory of evolution provides the answer to how our environment and the endless species of animal and vegetable life developed over millions of years, with no greater purpose than merely survival. The other option would be the possibility that an intelligent designer created this environment and all this diversity of life for a particular purpose. The suggestion that there could be a third possibility, that an intelligent creator may have simply manipulated the desired creation over millions of years by employing evolution as a creational process, will not really be considered, as that possibility is just as contradictory to the premise of an intelligent designer intent on a particular purpose as considering evolution completely separate from any exterior guidance or control other than the pursuit of survival. Any accommodation for respecting the theory of evolution is completely contradictory to the Bible record of creation for quite a number of reasons. The greatest of those reasons would be that any accommodation for respecting any variation of the theory of evolution places death as preceding the introduction of sin. Death is a condition that is absolutely necessary and central to both considerations, evolution as well as creation. However, the Bible's testimony of creation defines death as being introduced directly due to the introduction of sin, which is any contradiction of the righteousness of that creator. The theory of evolution demands the understanding of death to be a literal reality from whatever point life supposedly spontaneously generated. However, the Bible's testimony is that death was not part of the original creative order, but introduced as a result of sin. The purpose for the intelligent design of the Creator is very much bound up in this principle of death, or mortality, when death was introduced and when it will be eliminated. This is why there can be no possible blending of the two contradictory explanations for our existence. The odd phrase, theistic evolution, that has been pasted onto this concept that a creator actually employed the process of evolution as his creative procedure, completely contradicts the Creator's record of creation and literally all of his testimony throughout the Bible, that death was introduced after the complete environment, including diverse animal and vegetable life, and mankind was fully matured. So we are only considering the validity of one of these two very contradictory understandings of how we got here. It should not be surprising that the theory of evolution is predominantly defined outside the framework of actually being a theory, with an inappropriate presumption of being scientific truth. This kind of unproven scientific fantasy being accepted as fact by the huge majority of the scientific community is a very common historical pattern. Poor Galileo was literally tortured by the scientific community of his generation to recant the conclusions of his mathematical and astronomical research that a round Earth revolved around the sun, and not the predominant scientifically accepted understanding that everything else revolved around a flat Earth. Bible testimony is that the Earth is a sphere that hangs in space upon nothing. Isaiah 40 reports how the Creator sees the earth as a circle. And Job 26 declares how the Creator hangs the earth on nothing. That nothing is, of course, the invisible power of gravity. As our circle of the earth, which of course a Creator would see from any point of any perspective, would make that a sphere. Our sphere, our circle of the earth, revolves within the gravitational power of the sun. Eventually, this scientific sound Bible testimony was validated. But for centuries and centuries, the scientific community was adamant the Bible testimony was contradicted by their supposedly scientific presumptions. Similarly, for millenniums, the scientific community presumed that phlebotomy, draining blood from the body, was a scientifically legitimate cure for illnesses. Again, the Creator's testimony in the Bible repeatedly defines blood as the life of the body. Absolutely nowhere in the Bible is blood draining recommended to cure a diseased condition. Why would anyone want to drain their life away to resolve an illness? Again, Bible testimony was validated when the scientific community finally caught up thousands of years after the Bible explained that scientific truth. We could go on and on and on, as there are many examples of how the Bible testimony concerning scientific truths has always been right, despite being endlessly contradicted by the scientific community of any particular generation. The theory of evolution is just another example of the same consistent historical pattern of presuming the truth of an unsubstantiated theory. Despite the highly inappropriate way the theory of evolution is accepted as a fact, and no longer a theory, there are gaping holes in this theory. Spontaneous generation, life being instantly generated from inanimate matter, has not only never been proven, it's been scientifically disproven repeatedly by the rather famous scientists such as Louis Pasteur. The step that has to happen even before spontaneous generation even has an opportunity is that matter has to somehow develop the information that is necessary for life. Exactly how would inanimate matter develop the necessary DNA informational structure prior to that spontaneous generation, actually initiating life? DNA is the code for the development, functioning, and reproduction of all known living organisms. Exactly how did inanimate matter develop this very complex DNA code even before any capacity for life could be realized? These are just a couple of the issues the scientific community refuses to address when they declare the theory of evolution to be a scientific fact. Another would be the fact that the theory of evolution is based on the presumption that everything is always improving and getting better. Yet this contradicts the absolute control issue in nature we witness everywhere and is inescapable. This is the principle of decay. Everything decays. Metal rusts, food rots, wood rots, paint fades and peels. Every form of life grows old and fragile and wrinkled and weak and finally dies. Absolutely nothing ends up better without intelligent design. If we don't intelligently refrigerate that food, it rots quickly. If we don't seal that wood and maintain it, nature will destroy it. Decay, disease, death. This is the natural order, not constant improvement. That constant improvement that the theory of evolution is based on is conveniently imperceptible. not just within a single lifetime, but within the entire recorded history of this planet. Recorded history. The only supposed evidence of this theory is fossils, which have to be interpreted using a highly presumptuous thought process and scientific procedures based on the presumption that things have always been the same. It shouldn't be surprising that it isn't very difficult to deceive the scientific community that actually subscribes to the theory of evolution. The Piltdown Man was a massive hoax that was successful for decades in fooling the evolution advocates, as the discovered fossilized evidence was offered as evolutionary proof and qualified as the missing link between ape and man. However, the supposedly impeccable scientists making this discovery had modified the jawbone of an orangutan and combined it with a human cranium to promote their evolution presumptions and enjoy the benefits of world notoriety. About 40 years later, all it took was a basic microscopic examination of the teeth to see that they had actually been filed down with a metal file to make the teeth look more human. This proof of evolution was childishly simple to disprove as a hoax, but the scientific community drank it in eagerly, presuming its legitimacy without question, without critical examination. Although there are many potential directions available for scientifically contradicting the theory of evolution, our primary avenue of reasoning today will be in the category of vegetation. We are going to place the vegetable in the witness box to consider its testimony. We don't need to review the postulations of paleobotanists concerning their research on plant fossils. We don't want to listen to the ghost testimony of long-dead plant life with conclusions based on a structure of unproven presumptions. We want to hear the living testimony of vegetation that is all around us. However, that testimony of agriculture is not very prominent in the lives of most of us today, as it was for thousands of years for the majority of mankind. Over the last 200 years, agricultural employment has plummeted. Today, that agricultural employment, at least in the United States, constitutes less than 2% of our workforce. A few of us may have small gardens we tend in our backyard, but few work daily in the agricultural industry. Therefore, that available agricultural testimony would not be so prominent in our considerations on a daily basis. Even this kind of thought process, meditation on how issues interrelate, is not encouraged in our current technology-based society, demanding very brief, high-speed bursts of a thought process with all our acronyms and bullet points and abbreviated mission statements and sound bites and 3-minute news summaries and advertising targeting instinctive responses with rapid-fire images. We live in a society where speed is the dominant control factor, and where our minds can be so engaged every second with electronic devices that our lives can be in jeopardy due to the refusal to concentrate on a single highly significant activity. That's why there are now laws forbidding texting while driving. Our lifestyles are not conducive to meditative thinking, which can be very dangerous to our lives, both our mortal and the conditional prospect of being born again into immortal life. So let's step outside our societal thought pattern and consider, meditate about the testimony of plant life in the terms of whether the diversity of vegetation we can examine all around us could have developed by adapting on the basis of responding to a competitive environment, constantly improving over millions of years on the basis of the control factor of survival, an existence struggle, or that vegetation was intelligently designed as a component of a particular comprehensive purpose by an intelligent designer, a creator. Now, it should be understood that the reasoning originally presented in Darwin's Origin of the Species is not that the various forms of life were developing new capabilities because there was a need, but that any members of a species that didn't possess that new capability, that somehow came about, would die off, leaving only those with that capability to survive and procreate. Despite the procedural differential, the conclusion is the same. Constant improvement on the basis of the motive power of survival. This natural selection theory of Darwin primarily addresses animal life. The variations in ourselves and the creatures we see and are supposedly purely accidental, with the preservation of profitable features being a natural consequence in the selfish struggle for life, with that natural law operating without any ultimate design and no more interested in men than in maggots. However, this natural selection theory is incapable of explaining the variety, perfection, beauty, and absolute utility of the vegetable world. In the vegetable world, the struggle for existence is always degrading. There's no counterbalancing advantage to a moral stimulus, no will to survive against the odds and persevere. While we, or even an animal, may rise to the occasion in a threat, this is not possible with plant life. Also, unlike animal life, there's no mobility with vegetation. Plants can't flee from flood or fire. There's no battle for food and living space as decided in a few minutes, with death to the vanquished and abundance and peace to the victor. Vegetation cannot wander in search of a better environment in which to prosper. A plant is established by a mere chance of a seed being dropped on a vacant spot. It'll generally ripen its seed, even if it is hopelessly outmatched in a struggle with its neighbors. This fight for food and sunshine goes on indiscriminately between strong and weak. The natural selection that may be presumed as applying to the animal world has no application to vegetation. Seeds do not wander at will to make any choice for their fertilization. That seed from a strong, healthy plant, well-plumed plant, may end up in the waves of the sea. The well-hooked seed may attach itself to the fur of an animal to be shaken off in the darkness of a cave. The seed that survives doesn't do so on the basis of it being the best or the strongest or even the most likely to succeed, but simply the seed that by lucky chance drops into a vacant spot that has a congenial environment. There will still be indiscriminate fertilization between strong and weak. There's no favoring to the strong seed in the world of vegetation, as there might be in the animal world. If we have gardeners among us listening to this, we know that the first rule in the selection and preservation of favorable variations of vegetation is to prevent the struggle for existence by every means. Exactly the opposite rule for the theory of evolution, which presumes that it's the very struggle for survival that affords improvements in a species. If a gardener finds one plant among many showing a particular variation in a direction that he would like to pursue, then he will protect that favored plant from every adverse influence, from any competition for food, light, moisture. The plant will, as far as possible, be isolated. It will be fed, protected from frost and wind. Weeds and insects will be ruthlessly eliminated by the intelligent caretaker and crafter of this plant variation. And probably all other plants near it will be mercilessly cut down. When the seed has ripened and the time comes to sow for the next generation, that intelligent manipulation, cultivation, will continue. No opportunity for frost or drought or lack of sunlight or earth nutrients will be accommodated. The young plants are planted out so far apart and then watered and tended with the care to encourage the development of that new tendency. A gardener knows that if there is a struggle for existence, the plants will be weak and the leaves unhealthy. Under those circumstances, the plant can't even maintain the characteristics that are naturally native to it, much less develop new and better, stronger characteristics. That theory of improvement by a struggle for existence is completely foreign to the rules for improvement in the context of vegetation. Yet this principle of struggle and survival, which the plant breeder seeks to avoid to achieve improvement, is the very force promoted by evolutionists to explain all the wonders of nature. This evolutionary force is supposed to actually have taken the place of the plant breeder in the great garden of the world, despite the fact that its very principle of operation directly contradicts that natural pattern of development any gardener can witness for themselves with invariable consistency. One wonders how any gardener could subscribe to the theory of evolution. Let's look at the testimony of the strawberry. A frequent component of a home garden, an extremely valuable product of commercial agriculture, the basis for the success of the theory of evolution is the premise of natural selection, that nature selects the features of a species, animal or vegetable, that ensures survival, that the features of these species have developed over millions of years on the exclusive basis on the continued survival of that species. When I was a teenager, my grandfather died. He was a farmer. We moved back to the family farm from Kansas City to care for my grandmother. That next summer, I took care of a field of strawberries. They were very neat rows of strawberry plants, allowing one to kneel down in the dirt without having to crush strawberry plants with their big feet in order to harvest the fruit. We had a great harvest that first year after my grandfather's death. That next year, those neat rows were all gone. The entire field was overgrown with solid strawberry plants, and the fruit was nowhere near as good as the previous year. I had never been taught how to take care of strawberry plants. Well, strawberry plants can propagate through both seeds and runners. If we want more strawberry plants, a farmer or gardener doesn't have to wait for a seed to grow, but can take advantage of those runners. When a runner extends beyond the leaves of its host plant, it can be pinned or weighted to the ground by the gardener, where it can take root and develop a new and separate strawberry plant by pinching off the connection. One strawberry parent plant can actually produce up to a dozen other plants in a season through this process. And this is why my grandfather's strawberry field was so completely overgrown with strawberry plants that second year. Now, the evolutionist will claim these features of convenient production and the delicious fruit were not intelligently designed for the benefit of man, but simply the pure products of chance variations, which, proving profitable to the plant itself, have been selected in its struggle for existence. The problem with the production of these runners is that they are detrimental to the health and the fruiting capability of the source plant. Experienced gardeners will actually pinch off those runners to ensure a healthier, stronger plant capable of producing better quality and quantity of fruit than its energies had been, then stronger, a healthier, stronger plant capable of producing better quality and quantity of fruit than if its energies had been invested in producing numerous runners. And that's why my strawberry crop of that second year was dramatically less favorable, since I had not eliminated the runners of the previous year, as my grandfather had surely done in the years he maintained that strawberry field with its clearly defined rows. If these strawberry plants did not produce runners, their full energy could be directed to producing that fruit, for which his entire life is directed, full of seeds, for the continuation of a strong species. If the proposed principle of natural selection will invariably pursue the goal of survival and weed out those unnecessary or detrimental features that challenge that thriving survival, then why does the strawberry plant produce these runners that are detrimental to the vibrant production of fruit packed with seed and a strong, healthy plant? Any experienced strawberry gardener will know that if these plants are allowed to grow runners, they produce half as much fruit. This feature of the strawberry is not simply useless to its survival, it is actually detrimental, weakening each plant. And yet we're being asked to believe this plant naturally selected and developed this feature for its own survival. Well, let's ask another question about this survival force that evolution depends upon to explain the diversity of plant and animal life in relation to how few species in the plant world actually possess the defense capacity of producing poisons. If we think just a little about this issue, we would recognize that the absolute supreme power for existence would be on the side of vegetation. Vegetation has a monopoly on the power to transform raw chemicals into living substance. Animals, insects, human beings all feed on this vegetation. And of course, carnivores will additionally feed on the animals that feed on vegetation. The vegetable world has the capacity to produce poisons, which would quickly put an end to the molestation of the animals and insects and human beings that threaten their continued survival. If therefore nature had no force behind her, but this complete absence of any intelligent design for that struggle for existence, and if the natural selection had a tenth of the power that has been attributed to it, we should expect every seed to be equipped with poison to guard against its numerous enemies. Animal life and insect life could quite easily be annihilated if the only rule for continuing development in the category of vegetation was survival. We can easily take a survey of nature and observe the actual facts about this consideration. Now, there are a number of poisons derived from vegetation, but they constitute a very small part of the vegetable world, and they don't multiply rapidly. They're quite rare, which actually suggests there's a guiding hand upon them to prevent them from taking possession of the world for their own easily achieved dominance and self-preservation, if all they did was, by what the evolutionists call natural selection, embrace that self-protecting feature of producing poisons. Those dangerous drugs are comparatively rare in nature. The most prolific vegetation growth is just of those plants that are of most service to herbivorous animal life. If the evolution theory were actually true, if there was no intelligent design in the natural order, the vegetation would certainly have developed a far greater capacity for self-preservation through selecting this poison production, protecting itself against all the creatures that would presume to feed upon it. Instead of such selfishness, such exclusively self-promoting concern for survival, the vegetable world says to cattle and sheep and goats, "Here is food in abundance for you, and your limited level of intelligence only needs to be exercised to avoid those rare herbs which would poison you, if taken in quantity, but interestingly can serve as medicine in a small proportion." To man, that natural vegetative order says, "Here's food for you as well, choicer and better food, but you must use your greater intelligence constantly and work intelligently to grow it and nurture the greatest value from that vegetation." The category of vegetation is not based on an exclusively selfish control factor of self-preservation, but offers its abundance as sacrificial service to animal life. Isn't it reasonable to ask why it is that poisons from vegetation are rare and not extremely common, which would serve to preserve and protect vegetation? Why is it that the seed of some plants should provide us with such wonderful nourishment? Why should there be such a balance in nature that the vegetable world, with supreme power to slay, should not only let us live, but minister to our needs with that natural order's own vital forces? A man is blind as well as unthankful to claim that we owe nothing to any power outside ourselves, and that the natural order is always selfish, no matter how well it serves us. The truth is the other way. Man is selfish, and by his foolishness and slothfulness brings a curse upon himself. We can easily witness many evils generated by the endless selfishness of humanity. The natural order, on the other hand, is bountiful. There is ample provision for our needs, and this provision must have a provider. The nutritious nature of vegetable life, to enrich and preserve the lives of those who feed on vegetation, is another contradictory issue to the premise of this selfish, singular focus on a species' self-preservation. If the nutritious nature of wheat were abandoned by that grain species on the basis of being the root cause for its slaughter for harvesting that nutrition, then surely the law of natural selection would have disposed of that nutritional nature of its seed eons ago. If some plants can supposedly develop indigestible seeds for its own protection, like plums and peaches and avocados, then why would the seeds of so many plants qualify as perfectly digestible and nutritious, such as wheat, rice, beans, peas, so many others? In fact, our morning coffee is ground from the seeds of a cherry-like fruit. If a selfish species' survival is truly the most powerful control factor for developing vegetation over millions of years, then why do so many vegetable species offer their seed as a life-sustaining nutritional benefit to the animal life that cuts it down to get that nutrition? If we can accept the premise that this natural selection control factor can produce something so intricate and delicate and powerful as the human eye, then why couldn't this control factor have protected vegetation from developing nutritious seeds, ensuring the destruction of the plant and its seed? It should be noted that Darwin plainly stated in his published research that if it could be established that any plant or animal possessed any quality solely for the benefit of another species, it would be fatal to his theory. One wonders how such a common observation as vegetation that exists only to serve animal and human life could be so invisible to the evolutionist, promoting a theory absolutely dependent on selfish self-preservation at any cost. In that context, let's meditate about the pea pod. Peas are an extremely nutritious seed food for mankind, animals, and particularly birds and field mice, etc. We have to ask how that pod serves a purpose for the plant. Now, it certainly offers extreme value to the enemies of the pea plant, those who wish to devour the seeds within those pods. A bird or field mouse can quite conveniently use that pod as a harvest package, like a grocery store bag, to carry the abundance of nutritious seeds back home, where they will feast on the seeds of that plant. But how does that pod serve the purpose of the plant that supposedly developed that pod over hundreds of thousands or millions of years for its own benefit, its own selfish benefit? The pod offers no protection whatsoever for the plant's seeds. In fact, it would be difficult to find a plant in the vegetable world that is more attacked. The pod itself is actually nutritious to the predators threatening the plant by taking its seeds. There's certainly no difficulty getting through the pod to the peas inside. What value does that pod serve the plant? That would be the only reason for its existence on the basis of an evolutionary development. Why would the fruit of the plant be so attractive to harvesting and provide so much nutrition for its predators if those very features promoted the plant's destruction? If it weren't for the prolific nature of this plant producing the peas, one would think it should have been extinct by now. The pea pod is a demonstration of intelligent design, of how this vegetable selflessly serves those who threaten that plant's survival. The scientific examination of this very unselfish feature of its nature contradicts the foundational premise of the theory of evolution. Let's consider the vegetable testimony concerning reversion to type. The evolution theory is based on the premise of constant improvement on the basis of this struggle for survival. Throughout the vegetable kingdom, there is a universal law of conformity to the original type. Plants which have been altered by artificial selection and intelligently exercised cultivation will rapidly revert to their original natural conditions when the work of cultivation is relaxed. It's kind of like stretching a piece of elastic. Within certain limits, it is not difficult to alter the shape, but when the force which has been affecting that change ceases to act, the original form is resumed very quickly. If all plants and animals have evolved from very simple types to much more complex, all those innumerable stages in the long line of very slow but constant improvement would be equally natural. Why then should there be any innate tendency to revert to a previous condition? Evident very obviously throughout the entire vegetative division of this natural order. One understanding, the theory, is a direct contradiction to the other, a very easily observed and indisputable pattern. A gardener can develop superior tendencies in particular vegetables over many years of constant nurturing, separating those plants from the survival struggles they ordinarily experience, giving them well-aerated soil, enough space apart for vigorous growth, the elimination of all weeds and challenges to their air, water, and earth nutrients, providing protection from animals, birds, and insects in order to develop that hardier and more fruitful variation of this vegetation. However, as soon as cultivation and artificial selection by a gardener, one trying to intelligently design, when that cultivation and artificial selection stops, reversion to the original condition is witnessed very rapidly. It may take as little as a single generation to lose all those advantages when the protection from a survival struggle is removed. The very feature upon which the theory of evolution depends for the presumption of constant improvement. We could also question the purpose of beauty in the vegetable world. That's certainly applicable in the selection process in animal life. The male and female of a species is drawn to that beauty. That would subsequently be evident in their offspring. But how does that beauty that is so evident in vegetation actually serve that struggle for plant survival? Unlike animals, plants do not seek each other out, assessing their individual beauty. It's insects that fertilize these plants, in search of the value the plant offers the insect. The insects are in search of food and have no interest whatsoever in the beauty of a plant. That beauty feature offers no survival value to the plant and may even attract the predators coveting its seeds for sustenance. That beauty becomes a detriment to the plant's continued survival. But the beauty of vegetation saturates this world. The utilitarian uselessness of the plant's beauty is a contradiction to the very nature of that exclusively selfish evolutionary development basis, exclusively focused on individual survival. As we noted at the beginning of our considerations, there are many independent ways to demonstrate the illegitimacy of the theory of evolution that is so intent on denying the understanding of intelligent design in a created order produced for a particular purpose. When we consider the Creator's personal testimony concerning the features of the natural order that he reports to have designed and created, we find an incredible consistency and scientific validity in that testimony that spans the full 1,600 years of the Bible's development, and perfectly consistent metaphorical parallels to the natural order throughout the long list of contributors who were inspired to record every word, every letter, every number, specifically in the original Hebrew and Greek languages. We can see an absolute consistency in defining the enlightened community of men and women throughout Scripture to fruit-bearing vegetation, but the unenlightened always paralleled, without exception, to vegetation that does not bear fruit. The enlightened community is defined as wheat, barley, a vineyard, fig trees, olive trees. It makes no difference what book of the Bible is referenced and who wrote it in what century. The unenlightened are always defined as non-fruit-bearing vegetation, grass, briars, thorns, thistles. The exact same metaphorical representation is made throughout the Bible for each of the highlighted features of creation, the created order, often called the natural order. Clouds always, without exception, represent the presence, power, glory, and nature of the Creator. The rain that issues from these clouds in the natural order always has exactly the same metaphorical representation for every single contributor of the Bible, from Moses to the Apostle John. That rain issuing from the clouds above us always represents the Word of God, whether that Word is manifested in the spoken communication, written testimony, or the living testimony of the Word made flesh, the Son of the Creator, whose two comings are repeatedly identified with the early and latter rains that facilitate the harvest. When we actually take the time to focus on the miraculously consistent use of Bible references to the features of creation, that natural order, we find that the spiritual parallels to these features of the natural order demonstrate exactly the same parallel features as the physical, scientific relationships and effects in how these features of the natural order interact. In fact, if we choose to pursue this consideration of how the features of our natural order are used to parallel the spiritual purpose explained in the Bible, we would see that this precedent extends from the vastness of the universe right down to the atomic level. This is a theme that would take a significant amount of time to validate and demonstrate its perfection, but this consideration certainly validates the necessary intelligent design conclusion about our natural order that is the result of any truly scientific consideration. There are a number of meditational avenues to scientifically invalidate the theory of evolution. The testimony of the vegetable is just one of many that demonstrates the intentional design of the natural order, confirming a definite purpose to everything we can see, touch, hear, taste, and experience.